see you guys in the dark.
I'm a dietary aide at a local assisted living facility. If you're not familiar with those, they're sort of the step before nursing homes. Our residents here are healthy enough to live relatively independently, and we only assist them in their daily routine. The one that I work at really feels like the opposite of a nursing home. Rather than being cold and cynical, it's warm and almost feels like a lavish hotel. My job as a dietary aide is to assist in preparing food, serving food to the residents, cleaning the kitchen and dining rooms. Think of it as like being a waiter for the same group of people every single day. To give you a little background, I'm a 17-year-old girl who just graduated high school and is pursuing an associate's degree in pre-med at a local college before moving away to university. I've been working at this facility for around a year now, and have grown to really pretty much know all of my residents. One of these residents is Mary, who is mostly deaf, and who lives there with her 3 sisters. When I first started working there, Mary and I really didn't talk much or anything beyond me bringing her drinks and taking her order. I could hardly understand anything she said. Anyway, I knew that she was lonely due to the communication barrier between her and the others, so I attempted to reach out to her a little bit. I would smile and wave at her, ask her how her day was, etc. It wasn't anything I didn't do for my other residences, but it excited her immensely. Mary is a very touchy woman, and by that I mean she likes to touch those she's talking to, pat them, hug them, etc. I'm enthusiastic, and I usually jump when touched, but for some reason, she never made me uncomfortable. I took this as a good sign, and I allowed her to touch me, since I knew it was her way of showing affection, since talking wasn't very easy for her in the first place. It started as pats on the back and shoulder, and then it was hugs, then full-on embraces, and now she's at the point where she feels the need to kiss me over and over again. This was the point when I became a bit uncomfortable with the contact, but only because I was afraid of how it might be perceived. I have short hair, an overall butchy, and masculine appearance that makes many residents with memory issues believe that I'm a man. And I'm also openly a lesbian. One of my coworkers had to be physically separated from a resident who was romantically pursuing her, and I was afraid that my interactions with Mary would be seen as romantic, or anything else like that. Just to clear things up, I'm not attracted to Mary, and I'm almost certain she's not attracted to me. She constantly assures me that she loves me, and that I'm really sweet, but she's never come off as flirty or anything. After a few weeks of this, Mary has become persistent. When she's done eating, she stands by the kitchen door as I do dishes, and simply watches me, waiting for me to come out and talk to her. I'm really busy at times. She waited almost an hour for me to be free one time, just standing in the doorway and looking in. As I'm serving food and taking orders, she watches me. Co-workers and residents usually find it sweet or funny how she reacts, but she literally won't let me go once she has a hold of me. She's actually a really tiny woman, but she's strangely strong, and even if she wasn't, I can't exactly push one of my residents away. So I'm pretty much forced to deal with the hugs, kisses, and assurances of her love until either I or a coworker can get it through to her that I have to go back to work. Even then, it doesn't always work out since she's half deaf. She usually understands what I'm saying after a while, but whenever a coworker comes to my rescue, Mary becomes strangely hostile towards them, holding me tighter and saying she'd hold me for the rest of her life if she could. Tonight went as usual, with Mary waiting for me and attacking as soon as I stepped out of the kitchen. One of the CNAs told her that I had to get back to work, and Mary gave her literally the dirtiest, meanest look I had ever seen her give, and whispered to me that she would be back later. As a coworker and I were closing the kitchen, Mary showed up again, but just like she had promised, my coworker was getting the mop water ready in the back of the kitchen, and I had stepped out to clean the counter in the dining room when she latched onto me. "No one can bother us now," she said, and I heard it pretty clearly. She didn't like it. She continued most likely talking about the CNA that interrupted her. Mary embraced me, kissing me all over, and told me how much she loved me, and how she would love me for the rest of her life. After about 5 minutes, I was determined to get back to work, but she just hugged me even tighter. Eventually, someone was trying to get a luggage cart through the dining room, so I tried to break it off to let them through, but Mary just dragged me to the other side to let them through without letting me go. It was nearly 10 more minutes until I could convince her to just let me go. According to the CNAs, all Mary talks about is me. Even when I'm off work, she waits for me, as though I might show up somehow. I truly do love and care for Mary, and I often wonder what made her latch onto me. I don't know if I remind her of someone from the past, or if she just happens to really like me. But it's getting to the point where her life revolves around me, and she's willing to fight against anyone who gets in the way of that. It would be really sweet and cute if she just happened to like me, but she can't stand to be away from me. What really scares me is how she retaliates against everyone in order to be with me. My mom's theory is that Mary knows her life is coming to an end, and finds some sort of comfort in me. June 16th, 2018. You know my theory about how Mary might think I'm a man? Yeah, turns out that was the case. One of the administrators at work told me to avoid Mary until they could talk to her about the situation. And as I did dishes tonight, we had the kitchen doors closed so that Mary couldn't get to me. She started banging on the door, staring at me. When a CNA told her that she needed to leave me alone and let me do my work, Mary then said, "I want him." And one of the CNAs tried to explain to her that I was not only a girl, but also a minor. And this just sent Mary into a frenzy as she claimed that they were lying, and that she wanted to be with her man. She started making threats, both legal and physical, and eventually it was decided that corporate would be brought into it and decide if the best option would be to kicking her out. Since she technically harassed a minor, I was told this by one of the co-workers who was helping to guard the door, and I was stunned, horrified, and a lot of other things I can't really describe. This whole time, all of the kissing, touching, holding, it was all sexual. All the time she had invited me to her room, it wasn't just to hang out with me. It was to try to have relations with me. The woman I thought of as a sort of grandma-esque figure was actually romantically obsessed with me, and I can't help but feel violated. Even though she wasn't allowed to come near me, she sat by the dining room sobbing, feeling as though her only love was taken from her. It's sort of a difficult situation, since I truly do love her, but not in the way that she loves me. I know now that she's not all there, and I wish that I would have known this before reluctantly allowing her to kiss me on the mouth and touch me on the chest, thigh, etc. I just thought it was her strange way of expressing herself through touch, but it seems that she was simply too optimistic. Mary, as much as I care about you and want you to be happy, let's not meet, please. October 16th, 2018. My final update. You know how Mary would lash out at the people who claimed I was a woman? Well, not long after the big incident, I decided to tell her myself that I was not a man. I had to repeat myself tons of times, but finally, she looked at me and asked, "Are you sure?" I nodded, and finally it hit her that I was a woman. Turns out, according to one of the CNAs, she had claimed that I was the man who helped her at one of her local rehabilitation centers, which explains her initial attraction to me. She thought I was someone she knew. The next day, she asked me my name, and I told her. She smiled and said, "I still like you," gave me a hug, and went on her way. Mary finally understands that I am not who she thought I was, and doesn't hold that against me. She treats me like one of her sisters, and a few residents she's friends with, warmly but not overly attached. It also turns out during the period where she was unhealthily obsessed with me, she had a urinary tract infection, which tends to mess with the elderly's minds. I'm actually glad she put me through what she did. If she hadn't, they wouldn't have gotten her checked out and discovered the infection as soon. The events of this happened between 2005 and 2009. Age 9 to 13. I'll be honest, and some of the details are fuzzy since this happened a long time ago. As a child, I lived on a quiet suburban cul-de-sac with my mother, young brother, grandmother, and father. There used to be a big open field near my bus stop where all the kids would play, and across the street was a house occupied by an old married couple. For simplicity's sake, we'll call them Ruth and Frank. My grandmother and I would frequently run into this lady while going to various yard sales since I would accompany her. They would hang out, drink coffee, sit outside and talk, reminisce, all the cliché old lady things. My mother eventually became friends with her, and the three would mingle whenever Ruth would come over. It was great for me because I would get Beanie Babies, plushies, Hot Wheels, candy, or whatever she felt like bringing over for me on a daily basis. Just a generally nice lady. One day my mother and Ruth were talking, and the topic of her husband came up. She asked why Frank never came over with her, and she said she was more of a homebody who wouldn't go to... She asked why Frank never came over, and she said he was more of a homebody who wouldn't go too far because he had bad lungs, had oxygen, and was just all around frail. My mother, being super sympathetic and feeling bad, suggested that we come visit her instead. I recall my mother telling me that she seemed reluctant, but she had convinced her it was no problem, and we started going over there instead. Ruth's house was literally being only 4 houses down from ours. Enter Frank, an incredibly skinny 70-year-old bedraggled man who always smelt like a funeral home. Had super long, straight, grayish hair past his shoulders, a stubbly beard, green old man slippers with a pale blue bathrobe. Having been raised to always be kind and have the best manners around people, especially my elders, I was nice with him. Nothing major happened at first. It was just small, awkward exchanges that made me uncomfortable. The first flag were just comments on how cute me and my brother were, how he wished we were his kids, since Ruth and Frank never had their own. It was always strange to me about how much embellishment Frank would put into these sentences, but I just assumed it was a typical old person stuff since my mother seemed okay with them. The second flag was during a summer vacation of mine. There was an ice cream truck that always came through our neighborhood, and I'd never be able to get any because I never had any money, or my grandmother was stingy and would just say, "That's too expensive. We'll go to the store and get some later," which never happened, by the way. Anyways, when we went over one time, I remember asking her about money, and Ruth said I could help with some chores and get cash in return. Interested in the possibility of money and ice cream, I eagerly agreed and just assumed I would avoid Frank. One of my first jobs she assigned me to was pull weeds in the small flower bed in the front yard. So I came over the next day to pull some weeds. Ruth wasn't there when I knocked on the door, but Frank was. Slightly put off by this, I said I could come back later, but Frank told me it was supposed to rain the next few days, and I wouldn't want to pull weeds in the rain. Thinking he had a good point, I agreed, and he gave me a pair of oversized yard gloves, and I got to pulling some weeds. Frank came out on a porch a few times later, sat down in his lawn chair, and made an awkward comment about keeping an eye on me while I work so no one comes and takes me. He follows up with a compliment. I don't remember if I said anything, but I did largely ignore him and kept weeding. The plastic bag I had been using to throw the weeds away was getting full, so I looked up at Frank to ask if I can get another bag, and he was full on rubbing himself beneath his robe. However, as a dumbass child, I got confused, and he quickly switched the positions of his hands and started talking about dry skin and itchy legs. Freaking itchy, dry legs. I did eventually ask him about the bag, and he went inside to grab another one. The rest of that went quickly since I rushed to get done since I wanted to leave, but I also wanted to get my money. Frank stayed inside the remainder of the time I pulled the weeds. After I finished up, I knocked on the door and I told him I was done. He inspected my work, complimented it, and asked me if I felt tired. Answering honestly, I said yes. He straight up asked me if I wanted to take a nap in their bed since I worked so hard. Thankfully, my brain kicked into hell no mode, and I came up with some reason like having to let the dogs out or whatever and left. The third flag were multiple different occurrences. During my school year, my bus stop was literally right across the street from his house, and he would sit outside every single day. Every day he would either wave at me and my friends, or be scratching his damned itchy leg while he was waiting at the bus stop. My friends Mehdi and Callie were pretty immature about it and thought it was absolutely hilarious. They made it into a joke more than anything, which helped me make it less creepy for the time being. We had all sorts of names, dumb names for him and everything, but that changed the day he started touching himself even more when on the porch, to the point he was basically flashing us and fondling his junk. As a bunch of kids, you'd think we'd tell someone, but nope, we didn't tell anyone. The reason? My friend Kaylee, age 13, and I was 12, was always in trouble and sneaking cigarettes from her chimney, smoking mother, so she was afraid she'd get caught, and we'd all get in trouble or something dumb. Our solution was to walk to the next bus stop that was only a street over. We agreed, and from that point on, we took the other bus stop. The fourth red flag was when I would hang out with my friends on the weekend. My younger brother would often cry and complain to go, so I was forced to drag my brother with me when I tried hanging out, as I had no other way to ride past his house if I wanted to get to the small neighborhood park, or to see my friends at all. I would frequently pass his house. On occasion, he would flash us as we drove by, or scratching his itchy leg. The fifth flag was shortly after we had given Ruth a puppy. My mother's poodle had mixed babies, and we gave them all to close friends. I was particularly attached to the only female puppy she had given her, and was determined to see this dog, despite Frank being a creeper. So I decided to brave the first bus stop again, and stop to see the puppy. They usually kept her out on a long lead in the front yard that kept me a comfortable distance from Frank, who was also only able to go as far as his oxygen tank would let him. I'd mainly focus on her, but Frank would try to force conversation. But at this point, I had managed to get out of them pretty quickly. So he adjusted his tactic, and tried luring me closer to him by keeping the dog inside during the morning. Mind you, this didn't work, but the fact that he tried that was really crappy. I didn't get to see the dog much after that. Shit didn't hit the fan until Ruth broke down to her friend Debbie across the street and told her about her messed up marriage and what her husband does. This sent Debbie into a fix, emailing my mother right away and thus ending any type of connection we had with them. I eventually told my mother and grandmother and literally everyone else who asked about him if he'd abused us or whatnot. I don't really recall what happened afterwards, but we were forbidden from going that way anymore unless supervised. So I had to make a shortcut through my backyard, cut through other people's backyards so I could walk to and from school every morning, meet my friends, and go about my daily life. We've since moved from there around 2011 after my grandparents' passing, and as far as I'm aware, my mother hasn't spoken to Ruth since. I used to work at an office supply store in the copy center. There was an elderly man named Tom with the same last name as me. He would come in to get copies made, and I would always talk to him because I thought he was sweet, lonely, and old. After several months of him regularly coming in, one of my coworkers was speaking to him and made a joke about how I was newly single and maybe I should go for an elderly guy. He took her seriously and started coming in almost daily. I started to get worried when he started calling me beautiful all the time and started trying to touch me across the counter. I tried to keep my distance, but he began to go near the opening and get close to me. I finally told him he made me uncomfortable when he tried to kiss me on the cheek. He got really angry and started to yell at me. After that, everyone was on the lookout, and when he would enter the store, one of my male coworkers would confront him immediately and not let him talk to me whatsoever. We couldn't figure out how he always knew when I was working until a coworker made a comment about my grandfather picking me up. I immediately knew it was my stalker because both of my grandparents had passed away. He was always calling to find out when I was off so he could wait outside for me. The police were called when we noticed a large white van with no windows parked outside whenever I was working. I had already been walked to in front of my car the whole time, but that was when the police were called and he was taken away. I know he was older, but he had no family and nothing to lose. He scared the crap out of me. The fact that he would go that far to call and pretend to be him was chilling. When my coworkers would walk me to my car, I passed that white van a lot before we noticed a pattern. And to think he had been waiting inside there for me to be alone gives me the creeps to this day. It only had the windshield and the front two windows. I never knew what was in the back. I am lucky I had such caring coworkers, or else I probably would not be here today. The first one happened when I was around 18. I was hanging around my friend's block in a neighboring town. At one point we decided to buy some snacks, so we went to this local shop. Inside was an old lady. Something seemed really off about her. First she asked us if we can call a number she had written on a piece of paper because nobody's answering. If I recall correctly, the number had a weird number of digits, and we told her that. Then she gawked at one of my female friends and started saying stuff like, "You're so beautiful, so young," with this weird spark of insanity in her eyes. We decided to leave, and just as first of my friends headed to the door, the old lady caught me by my wrist. The grip was so strong I felt shocked. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me and grinned, showing a full set of crooked teeth. I told her to let go of me, but she didn't. So I just pried her fingers open with my other hand, which were surprisingly hard, and bolted outside. Dang, that was weird. Later, another friend, upon hearing the story and our description of her, told us how she sometimes walks around with a knife in her hand, mumbling to herself. The second one happened when I was 20, and living away from my folks for their university. I was living with 3 other guys in a flat in a 24-floor building. The neighborhood consisted of 7 or so of these tall buildings, so there were hundreds of people living in a relatively small area. Every one of these buildings was a 24/7 security guard sitting at the entrance. One night I was alone at our flat. It was 1 a.m. and I decided to go for a cigarette. Smoking was prohibited inside our flat, so I decided to go smoke in the stairwell. As I opened the door of my flat, I froze. Behind another set of glass doors leading to the stairwell was a man in his 60s or 70s just looking at me. I kind of noped and wanted to head back inside, but he called and asked for my help. I asked what does he want, and he tells me to let him in, which I refused if he lived where he'd have his own set of keys for the glass door, and otherwise there was a buzzer for every single one of the 4 or so flats on that side of the building. He asked me if a guy of the surname of Novak lived in a flat next to mine. I told him no. He asked if this was the 20th floor. I said yes it was. He asked me if I was lying, and he kept insisting that he was telling the truth. All this time I saw him wiggling the handle on the glass door. He was terrifying, pale, and had an empty look in his eyes. I told him I'm going to sleep, and went back to my flat while he kept repeating, "I'm not lying," and looked right at me. I closed my door and made sure I locked them good. I couldn't sleep that whole night. That experience was just too creepy. I never saw that guy ever since. So old guy, you are creepy. Let's not meet again.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.